Hey, this is NHSActivistRN here. Thank you for coming. This is part two of a conversation. The part one will be on Nurse Liz's channel, so make sure you check that out. The information's down below. We're interviewing Siobhan Aston today, who's a member of the Royal College of Nursing in Scotland. If you guys don't know, the UK, North Ireland, Welsh, and Scottish nurses are in bargaining in their respective unions for some important reasons, mainly pay and staffing on the job and for patient safety and retention. So we're going to talk more about, you're going to see on Nurse Liz's part one, a little bit more of the background, the macro, and then here we're going to be talking about the nitty gritty of what are they actually asking for. So make sure that you check the link below, like this video, subscribe to my channel. All the information to reach Siobhan and understand more about what they're going through in the UK is going to be in this video and listed below on her socials. And we're asking everybody to use those hashtags of NHS strikes, nurses strike, and fair pay now, NHS. There'll be more hashtags, though, if you check Siobhan's Twitter account. So make sure you check Nurse Liz's channel for the other part of this series. And we're going to be talking more as these nurses are going on strike and protesting on December 20th for the second time, 2022. Thank you. So I want to clarify another thing about the bargaining process, just getting back to that. So here in America, we probably do contracts we would do like a 3-year, a 4-year, maybe a 5-year on the long end in unions, mostly 3 to 4 years. So when you're saying that there's a restorative pay, 12% and a 5%, right? Then is that for just 1 year? What's that time frame? Because I think that also is a little confusing.
Yeah, so that is just for this 1 year. So every year what happens with public servants in the UK in general is that in April, then they are, or round about then, although it's been taking longer than that, they would make an announcement about what percentage that service is going to get. So, for example, in nursing, maybe that year, the recommendation, there is a thing called the peer review body, and they make a recommendation to the government. Right? This is an interesting one because in recent days, there has been a lot of headlines about the peer review body and whether or not they are independent. And I think already even the media are starting to answer they are not. They are appointed by government. They are given an overview of the financial context of what's happening in the country. And their recommendation, coincidentally, always falls in with that.
Interesting.
So you
pay
make a
rate, so pay
recommendation.
review, a pay review body.
Yeah.
And is this now, would this be, there's one in the Wales, there's one in UK, one in North Ireland, or how does this work?
So the peer review body, generally speaking, would make a recommendation and that would go out to England and Wales. I think generally always, would follow that recommendation. In Scotland, although Wales has devolution as well, in Scotland, because health is a devolved matter, in other words, our Scottish government deals with that, they could choose to pay us differently, which has been the case like previously. And this year, they done something really significant, and that is they broke away from the peer review body's recommendation. So they said, we'll meet with the union leaders and we'll discuss it. And they did. They roundtabled the issue and they came up with initially an offer of, I think, 5%. So it was slightly more than England and Wales, but that was then put out to a vote by the major health unions and everyone rejected it. And I would say the reason is because of the energy crisis and inflation, the rate that that's sitting at. So people said, no, that's essentially going to be a real terms pay cut if we accept that. So everyone rejected, which is unusual in itself.
So
To see
good.
that.
So was that perceived as good that the Scottish government broke away from the pay review board to go directly
Absolutely.
to the union? But then
Yeah.
it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough, but it was better, and the process was better because it involved direct negotiation with the unions and them pleading the case as to why they felt, the offer needed to be higher. And I think in the future, the Scottish Government will negotiate in that way. The peer review body has come into question, in particular, I would say the last fortnight, because they're getting blamed for a lot of what's happening, you see. The government are pushing the blame back onto them, saying, this is what they recommended.
Mm-hmm.
I think for talking sake, England was maybe offered, it's either 3 or 4%. I know it equates to £1,400 over a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so the peer review body, someone has come back and said, okay, wait a minute. We
Right.
done that assessment in February and
Mm-hmm.
inflation wasn't as high in February. So it's outdated. This has literally come out in the past few days. So maybe it needs to be re-looked at, you know. So I
Gotcha.
think maybe they're fed up of getting the blame when realistically the government's telling them.
And when we talk about the pay raise, so let's talk about wages a little bit because we haven't talked about
Sure.
wages. So for those of our brothers and sisters in America, prepare to have a seat, have a beverage, and take a deep breath when you hear this.
Because here's ours, because I just pulled up in the US. So this is kind of where most people are coming from here. The mean salary in the US for a registered nurse is $77,600.
Okay. Which I think, I mean, I don't know the exchange rate, but I'm guessing that's around 60,000 British
I can look
pounds.
it up, but that sounds about, yeah.
Probably
Roughly.
at the highest difference of the pound and yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. So here, when you first start as a nurse, so your very first year, the pay system has changed slightly. About 10 years ago, you used to start, and then in 6 months, you got a raise, and then 6 months again, and then you got one yearly until you were at the top of the pay grade. So you were at the top increment of that. Then they modified it, I think about 4 years ago, and you start on, I think it's about £26,000, and you don't get any raise at all for 2 years. And then 2 years in, you go to about, I think, 28,500. And then when you're at the very top, you probably make, I think in Scotland anyway, it's about 32,000 if you're a full time nurse.
Wow.
So that would be working 37 and a half hours a week. And you do get some extra money on top of that. So if you work nights and weekends, they're like those shifts are slightly higher paid. So if you were doing that half the year, which a lot of nurses do, you could pull in maybe a few extra thousand. But that's it. Beyond that, if you are promoting, it's because you became a specialist nurse, a deputy ward manager, or a ward manager. You know, but
Gotcha.
generally, if you come in, once you hit 4 years now, that's it. There's nowhere to go financially.
Wow.
So
And that's
4
about
years.
$38,000.
So 32 plus maybe 3 if you work weekends and nights half the year. So 35 if you've done that. Yeah.
Holy moly.
Wow. And that's right. And the wages are really spread out differently across the United States here. California pays the highest. I mean, I think, 2007, I started out at $26 an hour. I ended at $55 an hour in 2020, for example. And, I never really made, and with overtime laws, you get double pay over 44 hours in California at least. Whereas there are some people in like the South that are southeast of the United States that are making still $20 an hour or $22 an hour. So it really wildly varies.
Yeah,
But
it does sound that way.
typically our contracts would have, for example, you'd have a step increase, like say 5% every year, but then you'd have a range going across based on years of experience. So you might have, like a 1 year, like a 6 month, a 1 year, maybe a 3 or 4, 5 year, 9 year, 15, 25. And then and some of our contracts before I left the union, we were really pushing to add like that 25-year, 28-year step because people were staying in, nursing a lot longer. People were deferring retirement. And so you're basically in a unionized situation, you're always making money even if you're at the top of the scale, because you're getting the annual increase as well, additionally. So you might hit that year where
different.
so you might hit that year where like, oh, I landed on the 15-year mark, so I'm going to get the 3%, and then I'm still getting the 5%. I'm just using that as an example. And then if people's wages are out of scope, then they would all be brought up to scale. And that usually happens when nurses or healthcare workers first organize in the first contract, because the wages will be all over the place. Wage transparency is a huge issue. Employers never want you to speak about it and never tell anybody, we would just blast it. We'd be like, well, this is what I'm making, and everybody knew what everybody made, because what is there to hide? It's not going to stop anybody from getting a raise.
So technically, I think the system that you have, I would say, recognises experience, Whereas what I would say about the system that we have, I think previously, and I mean maybe decades ago, I think there was a recognition as you went up that you were more experienced, you were valued, and you were also able to educate your nurses coming in. That system was scrapped. And now you've got nurses who have got 30 plus years experience who make the same as a nurse who has 4.
Oh,
That doesn't make sense to me.
no,
It
and it's not
doesn't.
going to retain people. No.
Exactly. Retention is a key issue. I think our government think, oh, we'll just train. I mean, I say our government, I mean the UK rather than specifically Scotland. But I think our government think, oh, we'll just train more nurses. We'll train more nurses. We'll train more nurses. Yeah, it's like pouring water through a sieve. You know,
Right.
it's just going to come right back out unless you solve retention and look at why nurses are not staying. You know, and
Yeah.
yes, wages are a factor, but also so is the conditions that they work in.
Mm-hmm.
We don't value experienced nurses. And I think they also have no clue about skill mix. So to the government, a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. And you see, I don't know how this worked in America, right? But during the pandemic, I would say, obviously to cover short staffing, they would move nurses from the area that they worked in to a completely different area, right? And some nurses were deployed from the likes of surgical to intensive care. You cannot go from surgical to intensive care.
No.
To be fair, I would argue you can't really go from one area to another. Yes, we all have a baseline of skills that are transferable, but everyone has knowledge of their own area. I think the government don't recognise 2 things. One, that nurses all specialise in the area that they work in. And so to just move them around to plug gaps, it's not practical. They will be, I would say it's fighting fires. You know, they're just keeping things ticking along at the bare minimum of safety.
Right.
They also don't recognise that you could put thousands of new nurses in, but when we first start out, you don't know what you don't know, you know? So you're just trying to bring everything together. And the way that we do that is when we don't know how to do something or we're having a problem, we go to our experienced nurse and say, I mean, just for talking's sake, you know, I can't get bubbles out my IV lines. Help me. How do I improve that? And an experienced nurse comes and says, right, try doing it this way or try doing it this way. If you take that experience out the workforce, who's going to teach people how to become great nurses?
Yep. And
Very,
even like
very
you,
worrying.
yeah. And like you said earlier, in the beginning, you're so task focused that you miss the bigger picture. You can't talk to them and learn all the things that were so helpful to learn other components of their care or to be able to put all the pieces together. And I think that's true. It took years to get me from being a task oriented, like, oh my gosh, panicked little, like, tasky nurse to like, hold on, like, let me take a step back and be like, And if everyone leaves by the time they're 4 or 5 years into it, because they're like, what's the point? What on earth? Like,
exactly.
That's not safe.
And quite often too, nurses are put in a position working with new doctors too. That was the case. We had a lot of new nurses and then also a lot of new doctors. And in California, for example, just, for talking's sake, like if a doctor prescribes a medication that is the wrong medication or extremely high dose, the wrong dose, and that nurse administers it, the nurse is liable.
Yeah.
So we have to be, so we would be, hey, do you really want to give 5 times the dose of this cardiac medication, every 2 hours instead, it's something and we would see ridiculous orders and that's okay. I mean, everybody's new, but if you don't have a system that protects nurses and gives, again, you enough time, let me look this up. Oh, now I got to go maybe argue with this doctor and now they're going to make an issue of it. And, whatever it might be, that there's a lot that goes into our profession and a lot of liability. And again, a lot of people are not up for that liability or don't really understand that liability. And that, we work in a team collaborative environment. And so we're always teaching each other, whether I've learned so much from respiratory therapists, pharmacists, radiology techs, physical therapists, we learn from each other and we need to have that skill mix because the longer somebody's been in the field, the more they've seen.
Yeah.
And historically, right, like whoever's working during COVID this last 3 years, imagine in 20 years, that level of 10 years, that level of experience and what they'll be able to impart on new nurses then, or maybe nurses who have worked during times of war where you've got a lot of veterans coming in, or you see a certain type of it could be any kind of catastrophic issue, right?
Yeah.
It could be, oh, well, this was a time in California, for example, we had a lot of forest fires. And so we had a lot of respiratory issues, and it was a really different modality of treating people for smoke injury than asthma, for example. So it's important that we understand there's historical events that happen over time and the variety of patients that we see that help build this body of knowledge that we then want to share.
Yeah, it's so important. You do need that experience and also working closely with other professionals. In fact, I think really the experience of healthcare workers across the world during the pandemic is another reason why we are seeing these strikes now, because nurses feel like country was in crisis. When COVID first hit, you'll know yourself, we didn't know how bad is this going to be. I remember sitting watching Sky News and there was images and videos coming out of Italy, and I thought, oh my God, if it's in Italy, it's coming. That's it. It's going to spread. Initially, there was almost okay, there's this thing in China. What's happening? I'd heard a little bit about it. Once it hit Italy, that was it. It was real. We knew it was on its way, and we were all wondering how bad is this going to get. And there are nurses now who have post-traumatic stress disorder from dealing with the difficult situations, the increased level of patient loss that they had never seen in their career. And I think if you want to compound that with wage cuts, real terms wage cuts, and a lack of respect, that is another factor that is pushing nurses out onto the picket lines.
100%. 100%. The emotional toll. And I left bedside March 2020, like literally as the pandemic started. And, I don't have any intention of ever going back. I miss my patients like many of us, but the environment is not there that supports us. And I think that issue of emotional mental health and the toll that so many healthcare workers have, experienced is real. That's a real issue.
Absolutely. And we don't have the infrastructure to provide the emotional support that a lot of the healthcare workers, that they need. I do think, and I will be fair about this because I always try to be balanced when I'm making an argument, and I will say that, the area that I work in, they try to put some things in place, like a well-being room, for example. It's really quite nice. You were able to talk to counsellors. I think at one point you were able to get maybe like a handful of sessions with like a trained psychologist. So they have tried to do some things. I think there has been the recognition from employers that they had to do something to try and deal with the impending mental health crisis in the workforce. But I do think when you look at, say, France, I think would be a good example. French healthcare workers, I think, went out and protest, and I'm pretty sure they were offered a large bonus or a large percentage pay bump straight away in the pandemic. It was like they're out, they're angry. The next thing, I think the French government handed them 10%.
Well, the French, they'll hit a strike on the drop of a hat.
They're fantastic. I love the way that if they're not happy, they will take to the streets and their government will know about it. It's a bit different to what I see as the corruption we see in our government over here. So like when you look at these things, I think they're naive to think that what happens in other countries doesn't have any influence on ours. If we see that other healthcare workers are coming out and they're winning, that's going to spread,
Yeah.
And do you think that what you guys are doing in the NHS is going to have any trickle-down effect to the Commonwealth countries? I mean, because I know the pay is very different and kind of all over the place in those countries as well.
I'm not really too sure about that. That's about out with my knowledge base, if I'm honest. I would hope that it would. I would hope that if there is a significant fight anywhere in the world, that it's going to inspire people from other countries to say, if they can do it, we can do it. Because you can. That's the thing. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is thinking, right, what difference will it make if I get involved in activism?
Right.
I'm one person. That's mind-blowing to me. One person has an immense level of power. If you put your mind to it, you can create influence. you can be part of something really like life-changing, essentially, for people in the profession. So if it happens here, I absolutely believe it can happen anywhere, because that we don't historically, I think, for a long time have a history of fighting for decent pay in the NHS. There have been big strikes, but it's been a long time. So if the UK can wake up, anywhere can. Yeah, I really believe that.
Yeah. And people like you, I mean, you have not been a nurse very long. You know, you came out and you said, hey, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to take some action, start on Twitter, and it grew. And it takes, you know, and we are stronger together no matter what. We're always more powerful together. And that is our power, is unity, because we're not going to have the money and the deep pockets to pay lobbyists and, you know, pay the government and, you know, have that influence with the media and stuff, unless we make the media and we become the media. And like in your case, Siobhan, you've really become the media, which is exactly what nurses and healthcare workers need to do.
Because there's a lot of us. Like just in sheer numbers. That's what.
Same in the UK. When you look at the number of NHS workers that we have, we could be a all-powerful workforce. We really could. But I think, I mean, I have spoken to nurses from several countries at this point, and I do think that, yes, whilst I'm working within the framework of trying to make change in the UK, the more that we connect, the more nurses will realise what is missing in their country that they maybe need to do something about, because we need to have that dialogue. You know, I've spoken to yourself. I've also connected with a campaign in Ontario in Canada that I found them on Instagram. I also don't really have a presence on Instagram, but randomly found it. We got in touch and we've held signs for each other's campaign. So we put up one with their hashtag on it and they held one for ours. And it's that solidarity being demonstrated across the globe, essentially, that I think is going to help us all to move forward, because maybe you organise slightly differently, but maybe I learn something from you that I take back to our organising strategy that helps us win. You see what I mean? Like, that's why I think these kind of conversations are pivotal, really, in making the changes.
And speaking of hashtags, what are the hashtags that you would like us to use here to support the NHS nurses?
So you could use hashtag nurses strike, hashtag NHS strikes. What else can you use? Hashtag fair pay for nursing.
Okay.
And you will probably get your tweets seen by people in the UK, because a lot of people are following the stories quite closely. Yeah, and I can send you like a message with them in them as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
so you're saying the best forum right now is Twitter? Is that
I think
people are looking for information?
Personally, I think in the UK in particular, it's not just because that's a platform that I'm on, but I think political Twitter in the UK, Facebook and that, they have their place. We do use them. But personally, I think people that are interested in politics in the UK, I think it's Twitter that they go to. Yeah. And that's why I think using the hashtags will get you seen if you wanted, because funnily enough, the nurse who I speak to from Canada, she had put out a few tweets with those hashtags, and I had found them and retweeted her. And she was like, it was funny because we've spoken and there's been big gaps between the conversations we've had. And I said, so how are things over there? You know, how are you doing during the pandemic? And she messaged me and said, what time do the strikes start? And I said, you know, they start roughly probably 8 a.m. in the UK. She's like, right, that's 2 a.m. here. I'm going to go to bed now, set my alarm, get up, because I don't want to miss the beginning of the action.
Oh,
that's good.
And I was like, I thought that was amazing. You know, all the way from Canada, we just randomly found each other.
Yeah, I mean, and hey, that's something definitely here, if that's the case again. So the next strike day is coming up, right?
Yeah, on the 20th.
20th.
And the thing that people don't realise yet is that the Royal College of Nursing, on the strike day there on the 15th and on the next one on the 20th, they haven't called out the full force of the striking workforce. They've only taken out about half at the moment. And I think it's probably, if I had to take a guess why, there's a couple of reasons. There's so much organising involved in this because, in particular, You have to form strike committees to decide what the delegation numbers are in each area or department. So that is a lot of work. You need enough people to do that. But second of all, because if the government don't come to the negotiating table, the pressure can be turned up. Only half of the strike the areas that met strike turnouts are out right now. You could literally double the impact overnight.
Mm-hmm. So if we have, the 20th, which is Tuesday, is that Tuesday?
Yes, it is.
Tuesday. So if the strike, so you're saying it'll start about 8 o'clock in the morning, GMT?
Yeah, roughly 8 to 8. So it'll last roughly the duration of our average day shift, which is 7:30 to 8 at night. Yeah, it's a possibility. I'm actually, because Scotland is on pause just now, because we had another offer, obviously, which the unions are voting on right now. My union will be the last result to come back. I'm hoping we'll know the result of that next Wednesday. So on Tuesday, there will also be solidarity demonstrations around the UK in some of the major cities, just for the areas that never met the legal thresholds. I don't know if you have thresholds in the US, but here the government in the 80s, because there were so many strikes, they brought in anti-trade union laws, which meant that you had to have a minimum of 50% of your membership eligible to vote. And then they obviously had to vote for strike. If you hit less than 50%, even if 90% of those voted for strike, you can't go on strike.
Right. So those were brought in under Thatcher, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So
exactly.
I'm old enough to remember Thatcher, and
me too.
Yeah. So right, and that's really important. So if we get this video out and before the 20th, then we definitely want folks here in America, nurses on night shift, whatever time zone you're in, to be out there tweeting and getting those hashtags out and showing solidarity for our brothers and sisters, in the NHS. Yeah. And it sounds like this may go on. It sounds like this may not come to resolution in this
right week. Now. So I would say historically, when it was nationwide, which, like I say, we'll know if Scotland is in the mix. We already have the strike mandate. We've had the legal vote that will enable every single board in Scotland to go out and strike. It's just now a consultative ballot on the new pay offer. If we reject it, we'll also be in the mix for striking. If it's nationwide, the pressure is going to build on the government. The Royal College has never been out UK wide before, but 3 years ago in Northern Ireland they did, and they won that dispute after 3 strike days. So I'm optimistic. It may go on, but the pressure may need to be turned up.
And the pressure of the progression of COVID again. I mean, this is going to be, I have no doubt, a tough winter. And we're just at the beginning of it. So that is going to turn up the pressure as well. And that's why it's so important to have the public behind you and really understand, why nurses strike, why healthcare workers strike. It is about the patient safety, because if nobody's going to work and be brought in and stay in this profession without the right environment for care and the pay and benefits.
And I think really the work that we've done maybe the past 2.5 years since this campaign started, and there are other grassroots as well. The advantage of being grassroots is that you can encourage union members from any union to vote, get involved. Yes, I'm with the Royal College. There's other activists that are with GMB or Unite, because maybe in their area that union has a stronger presence. Unison, we do have some, but there's not that many, but there are a couple of significant Unison nurses in our campaign. We've been getting that messaging out there for a couple of years, explaining to the public that it's been building to this. So luckily, it's not just come out of nowhere. I feel like a lot of the groundwork has been laid to explain what's happening. And because the public, like I say, the NHS it's a beloved institution in the UK. It is. We all value it really highly. And apologies, because I don't mean to cause any offence, but we look on in America with horror.
So do Adrian and I.
Yes,
to be fair.
we look at it and honestly, I think the majority of people, we use America as the example we don't want to end up like.
Yeah.
Say no,
because,
fair
enough.
Like, I seen I mean, is it Michael Moore?
Yeah, Michael Moore.
He makes documentaries, and I had seen the one about the health service in the US and people having to go to Cuba, I think it was, to get medication cheap. And, you know, we're looking at that and people were losing their houses and stuff, and we're saying, if you don't want this, you need to fight, you need to support us, because if you don't have enough people working in the health service to make it viable, then they are going to push you further and further towards a privatised model. And one day, I think a lot of people who maybe have money, right, have the attitude, well, I'll be fine, you know, because we do have some private insurance here. It's probably important for me to mention that. But I'll tell you what happens with private insurance here. It maybe covers you for things like, let's say you need a hip replacement or a knee replacement, and you have private insurance, you could maybe get in and get that done faster. But if something goes wrong, what do you think happens? There are no acute care hospitals in private insurance. They transfer you straight to the NHS if something goes wrong. So I think a lot of people think, oh, I'll be okay, I can get private health insurance. Yeah, okay, you could. But some people who've got the best level of insurance in the US still have to do co-pays, or they find out that their surgery or their treatment has been denied. So I think people have got a false sense of security. They think, oh, well, I've got a good job or I've got good healthcare with that job, until something goes wrong.
And then you get laid off.
Exactly. Yeah. There's so much can go wrong with that system. And I think most British people look at it and think, no.
Well, and by and large, you know, fully funded health insurance is a function of a union contract. That was the thing that my hospital, we had put a strike notice down in 2019, was because they wanted us to start paying a percentage of our health insurance, and ours was fully funded. You know, and I don't like to use the word free. I mean, there's a cost. The employer paid for all of it. So, for example, you know, I've never once paid for health insurance in my job as a nurse because I always was a union member. But if you're not in a union, you're not, you know, even in the federal government now, they're paying a percentage copay. And then they have their own unions too. So it really is a function of being in a union contract to have that fully funded insurance, you know. And if you don't have and the difference of employer insurance versus private is so completely different in the United States. I mean, it's exorbitant what you pay.
I can imagine. And I have seen a lot of people make the argument, you know, but in the US, if you want to see, we call them GPs, I think you call them primary care doctors.
Yep.
And so if you want to see a doctor, you can get an appointment really quickly. Now, I'm not for 1 minute going to say to you that this system doesn't have problems, but I can tell you that, you know, when I was sick, my primary care doctor, I was there the next day, you know, they seen me less than 24 hours. I didn't pay anything for it. I got my operation. See, at the beginning of this year, I had a kind of medical emergency and the system was in crisis. But once I got diagnosed, I found out I had a really significant non-cancerous tumour in one of my ovaries. And it was scary because a lot of surgeries were cancelled because of COVID, but it was really big, so they had to get me in quite quickly. I never paid a penny for that. I didn't worry about what if I can't afford $10,000 to get this removed. Or do you see what I mean? It's like, to me, it's scary. It must be scary to live in America. Like,
it is.
Frightening. Yeah.
And also, we don't have any caps on medications, right? So you could pay $500 for a nitroglycerin pill in an emergency room. So that's
I remember you saying that. Like, that's wild. Absolutely wild. So something that you need to maintain your life here, if you don't get it for free, it will cost you £7, $10 max. Doesn't matter what that is. It could be nitroglycerin. It could be insulin. It could be an antibiotic. £7.
Wow. Let that sink in, everybody. £7, right? If we could only dream of having some medications. So one other thing before we wrap up is I want to just ask you about solidarity with other unions, other trade unions, other industries. Is there outreach, you know, to the miners, the coal miners union, or other unions, teachers unions, etc.?
So right now, obviously, because of inflation, we're seeing a resurgence of the trade union movement, is the way that I would put it. And this is from me, and I consider myself a lay person, you know. So I would say, from my point of view, we're seeing a resurgence in trade union activity. So you've got, for example, our rail workers in a union called the RMT. They have been all over the news. Their general secretary is so down to earth, articulate, quite inspiring. So as activists, grassroots activists, we're making connections with unions, postal workers unions, teachers unions. It's my personal belief that we're all stronger together, and that if we work to raise attention to each other's causes and pay claims, we're much more likely to be successful. But that's a lot to do with my personal politics. Mm-hmm. Whether or not my union is actively working with other unions right now, I would say no. Not sure why. I think possibly because our strike and things, it's in its infancy, and so they're maybe still putting the pieces together, whereas I've been out here doing this a couple of years, you know, on a grassroots level. So it's a bit different for myself and the other activists who have been kind of ready to go for a while. We've been making connections throughout other unions because we can all learn from each other. It's like I was saying about that global conversation. I believe that everyone we meet can teach us something that can help us move forward the rights of working class people. So, yeah, I do believe we're seeing a lot of solidarity, and I'm actively encouraging, for example, firefighters, rail workers, teachers to come to our picket lines. And I've also attended a couple of theirs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's, like I say, that's really maybe more my personal politics than what you're necessarily seeing in the nursing unions, but that's not to say it won't happen in a more connected way. I would like it to see it connected to everyone's activism right now.
And that's interesting because I feel like, I don't know, Adrian, if you would agree, but in the US, there's a lot more venom when people go after nurses, like versus when you see other unions kind of striking, they're like, oh, they just want to be treated better. Yeah. And it seems like when it's nurses, you're like, you're abandoning everyone and you should be ashamed.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there certainly is. Like we just nearly had a huge railway strike in the United States that was averted and by kind of a Hail Mary move by Congress, which is similar to what happened under Reagan with the air traffic controllers in the 80s that basically started a lot of union busting. So those railway workers have now ousted their president because they took a deal they didn't want. But what, now I've seen a lot. I can tell these ads I'm listening to on the radio are extremely anti-union. They're about specific to the railway workers, about commerce, moving items and goods around the country, and we need to come up with permanent solutions. And they're not going to mention, railway workers and unions, but now's the time. So there's definitely a lot of millions and millions of dollars pouring into that. And again, in the United States, we have lobbyists. We don't have campaign finance reform. There's just a ton of money that is spent on lobbying efforts and advertising.
Yeah,
so
I've seen that.
And now we're looking at there's a whole move for airline pilots to fly alone. This is happening with ambulances already. New Jersey is starting to put out ambulances that have only one person in the ambulance, not two.
That's absurd. Yeah,
and it was the same thing in the railway. It's like, let's just cut down to like where it's completely unsafe. There's no backup. I mean, again, and the public doesn't understand what that means because one person can't bring grandma down the stairs 5 flights on a gurney. We just had an airline pilot pass away in mid-flight. The plane can kind of run itself remotely. But again, these are safety issues, and there's a reason why there's these safety nets of staffing in different industries, and we are going in the wrong direction in this country, and I think globally. And I think it's all the more reason why people really need to step up, because people fail to realize that we're all workers. Unless we're in that 1% in the trust fund kids, or my check has my name on it, we are a worker. And so we are at the mercy of all of these different players and laws and regulations. And so it is very important that we, honor and respect workers and ourselves. And the only way we're going to do that, I believe, is through unionization, strengthening labor laws, and building, collaborations and networks of support. So, for example, in the United States, so if the nurses go on strike, so when we've been on strike before, the other unions will sanction a strike. So the Teamsters, for example, are the truck drivers. Now, they don't run all the trucks, but for example, if they represent, or another union maybe represents the trash people, they will not drive onto the property and cross the picket line and pick up the trash from the hospital. The hospital, CEO or whoever will have to push the trash bins all the way to the street. They won't bring deliveries into the hospital. They will drop them off on the street in the perimeter around the hospital. So they have the right in the United States to not cross a strike line. Even if you're not unionized and you work somewhere where there's a strike, you're not an exempt employee, you're not salary, then you have the right to not cross a picket line if that goes against your personal belief. Yeah. So
we have that. Yeah.
So there is definitely some solidarity. I think that, one area that for nursing that we have used very successfully are the churches to organize, community organizations, really being able to get into the community. But I think we can do a lot better job. I honestly think a lot of unions everywhere, in America can do a lot better job with the community aspect of organizing.
I think sometimes it's about presenting the human element of the story here. We in the UK, although it's not affected me personally because I'm lucky enough that I have 2 incomes coming into my household because I'm married, my husband is working, but there are nurses who are relying on food banks to feed their children, single parents. Food banks are an increasing scourge on UK society. Poverty is a massive problem here. I know it is in America as well, don't get me wrong. But people need to understand what is actually going on behind why are we staking these pay claims. There are people who are really suffering and struggling to keep food on the table right now. I don't know what it's like in the US, but energy, so like gas and electricity to keep your home warm, is costing some people as much as their mortgages.
Oh my gosh. No, we're not. I mean, at least here where I live, that's not.
Yeah.
The price of
as
petrol.
Big of a.
Yeah, it's gas for your cars. That's gone up, although it's not as bad as it was. It's come back down slightly. But energy costs are a massive concern. And you think if a brand new nurse after tax and pension in the UK, if she doesn't have shift allowance or he doesn't have shift allowance, is probably coming away with £1,700 a month. Now, if your mortgage or rent, say you've got a few kids, right, is maybe 500 as an average, and energy right now to keep your house warm is probably also 500. And then you've still got to put food on the table, and you've got to put gas in your car to get to work. Explain to me, how is it possible? And that's why we fight.
And that was going to be one of my last questions, was going back to the pay thing, was because I know people I've seen in different things, they're like, well, the cost of living is different. But to me, it doesn't seem like, even if there was a cost of living difference, that for what the cost of living is, like nursing salary does not seem to be able to cover it, especially on a single income. Do you think, does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that maybe a nurse on a single income could get by, right? If she maybe didn't have kids, or I keep saying she, I'm stereotyping. If he or she didn't have children, they might manage to get by. But what I would say is that is becoming increasingly difficult, particularly if you're newly qualified, because obviously you're making less money.
And you said most people are adults. Like not adults, but like into their life adults.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you were to look at the workforce, we are predominantly female. I think statistically, I think 90% and 10% male in the workforce. I think majority, I would say, are at least 30, I think. I could be wrong. That one is just from personal experience. It's anecdotal. The statistics might say something different. But yeah, I think a lot of the people that I know, they do have children. They're trying to do this job. They're trying to pay their bills. And I feel like we're getting into a place where people's expectation of the standard of living. It's almost like people say, oh, well, in Britain right now, you could see it all over Twitter. Oh, well, you've got £2,000 coming in. Well, I've only got 1,500. Good for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, you've got 1,500. I've only got 1,000. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
It's become a race to the bottom.
Right.
It really is. And the reality is, say, for example, I'm talking to a carer, so someone that goes out into the community and provides home care. They are very, very poorly paid, way worse than nurses. And I say to those people, because I have had a few come back and say, I'm a carer and I make, £10 an hour versus a nurse a senior nurse like me, experienced nurse at the top of band 5 makes nearly 17, right? And I say to them, look, this isn't a race to the bottom. What we need to do is you need to unionise and you need to fight for better, because I agree with you. Considering the amazing job that you do, you're not paid enough. So it's trying to get people away from that mentality of, well, you're doing better than me, so what are you complaining about? It's like, no, how about you join this?
We could both do better.
And I want to say that's the opposite of how rich people operate, right? I mean, I'm a private patient advocate. That's a whole industry because people don't trust the healthcare system, right? I charge a good amount of money. I'm less than a lawyer, but it's not cheap, right? It's about a $5,000 retainer for my services. So, wealthy people say, oh, wow, you made $2 million on that stock. How can I do that? They have the race to the up, right?
Yeah.
And it's a different mentality. It's like, how do I do that? Oh, really? Can you give me that tip on this stock? Right. Because my clients are at a higher echelon. And it's a really different mentality. And you're right. People get into this comparative game where it becomes a race to the bottom, and it's all that is part of the machine of classism and eroding workers mentally, right? So that it's like, oh, let me have hatred or anger towards you because you're doing a little bit better than me, but we're all kind of down here, right?
And I think if you're going out to work, and that's not a criticism of people who are unable to work, and I need to be really emphatic about that. But in this country, if you're going out to work, you should be able to expect more than survival.
Yeah,
that's the thing for me. What you should be able to, I mean, I live in one of the cheapest houses in one of the cheapest areas in the UK. I drive a car that's probably 14 years old. My husband is the same. I'm not saying we don't have any luxuries. I don't mean that. But what I mean is, it's almost like people think it's wrong to expect better for your life.
Yeah.
And no, I'm sorry. That's divide and conquer tactics by the government.
Right.
They will put it in the media. They plant the seed. Oh, look at these nurses. They're greedy. They make way more than a carer, and they do an important job.
And nobody has that argument about doctors. Nobody ever does that about doctors.
Over here they do actually. They'll say, what's a doctor complaining about? I mean, nurses do so much work and they only get paid this. But the thing is, once you've been involved, which you'll know yourself with trade unionism, activism, you recognise what they're doing. It's propaganda. They are trying to divide people because divided, we are weaker. And what we are trying to say is, no, you deserve a better wage also. It's not a case of you versus me. It's us versus the government,
Right.
If we all join up, we all deserve better, because no one in the government is worrying about how to pay their energy bill, because it's paid for them if they're a member of parliament.
Oh.
They claim money for their second houses in London, etc. They get food allowances. They get expense accounts. Those people don't understand everyday life for your average worker. So we need to make them understand.
Yeah.
100%.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Can you debunk one graph for me that I thought I was so cool in finding? So guys, I was researching for this and I was like, look, Siobhan, I found this graph, and I showed it to her. She's like, that's highly controversial. So I was like, we need to figure this out before this is over. I feel like this could make its rounds on social media because it is a graph from the BBC showing like the pay of nurses in the NHS. What is this controversial?
Okay, the reason that it's controversial is because what a lot of people are taking from this graph is they're looking at it and saying, right, okay, maybe nurses do start on 26,000 for talking sake, but then, you know, they get to 32,000 in Scotland. It's a bit less in England, I think. But then they're going to move up and they're going to make, say, 35 to 45,000 or 40,000. And then they're going to move up and become specialised. What people don't realise is that, see that very, very top one, starting pay band, over 50% of nurses are band 5. Okay, so that's the starting pay band. They don't move up necessarily. So this, yes, maybe an illustration that's accurate in the sense of, well, the experienced nurse one, I would just remove that as nonsense, because an experienced nurse can be a nurse on the starting pay band, you know. And like I was saying earlier on, a nurse of 30 years can be sitting at 31, 32,000. They're not moving up to that next bracket at any point unless they promote to a ward manager or a deputy ward manager. And a specialist nurse are highly, highly specialised. A specialist nurse here would be an advanced nurse practitioner. So they could be doing things like a lot of wards operate with advanced nurse practitioners and less doctors.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of level they are diagnosing, etc. Or maybe they're performing things like gastroscopies, colonoscopies, you know, like these are highly specialised people, quite often with like master's qualifications, for example. And consultant nurses, I don't know many consultant nurses. I've not met many. So that kind of proves that point. Of course they exist.
Yeah.
But yeah, the graphic is controversial because I think people are thinking, right, and they end up, they're making maybe 50,000.
Yeah.
What's the problem? The problem
that
is that's not the reality for over half of the workforce.
Yep. You're not moving over and down. You're kind of just here.
And I think that's what a lot of the public were assuming when they see this, is that, you may be limited in the beginning, but you're not generally. And I think the thing is, we can't make the assumption that every nurse wants to be a ward manager or a specialist nurse. Maybe they want to spend their career as a bedside nurse or a clinic nurse. And it feels like there's no recognition of retaining that experience and the value that represents. You know?
And you shouldn't have to do that in order to make a living wage.
Exactly. What's wrong with being a bedside nurse? What's wrong with spending your career doing that? Because quite often what people say is, yes, you can increase your pay, but the more that you do, the further away you move from patient care. Not always, but in general, I would say, becomes more managerial. That's not why a lot of people come into the profession. They want to work with people. So shouldn't we be saying, right, you've been here 10 years, you've been here 15, 20, you are teaching new nurses coming in, which means that we are able to provide a better experience and better level of safety, so we'll pay you accordingly. Current system does not value or recognise that.
And I think there's a lot, my personal opinion is that a lot of that is about the size of the population of millennials and Gen Z. This is a unique time in history for big business to really move out a lot of senior workers in general and really spread that rhetoric of devaluation of workers across any profession, right? And to really cater to kind of the myopic view of young people, right? The privilege of youth, as we call it. And I think this is a really historical time where that is happening, right? And so I think that's something that we all have to be aware of, and we have to really generationally be cognizant of.
Yeah, I think we're providing right now nothing, I think, to attract young men and women into nursing. You know, because people do, I think maybe there is a generational difference in that the expectation is the younger generation now, quite rightly, want to have a life where they can expect to travel and they can live in a nice home and they can drive a nice, I don't mean a fancy car, but a nice car that works. They want those things, and so they should. We should all, you know, I don't mean just in a materialistic sense, but I think we should all expect our work to pay off. And so they're looking at professions and they're assessing maybe based on, well, what's the potential going into that profession for me? Right now, nursing, I don't believe is giving them like, there's no pool. They're going to go, right, yeah, maybe I would have been interested in becoming involved in healthcare or medicine, but realistically, it's going to be a tough life. All you see in the media is about how nurses are broken, overstretched, tired, despairing, wanting to leave, and poorly paid into the mix. So,
right.
would you? Some people
it makes
naively
being
might.
a mechanic or a plumber look much more appealing. I mean, or a bank.
There's some of the people I know now, there's been a real, I think, reversal. And that when I was younger, the desirable jobs, the way you were taught was white collar jobs. Maybe you could be working for a bank or something like that, and you would get a decent salary and you could have a nice home and a nice life. And now the people I know that generally are doing well financially are my friends that are in the trades. So they are joiners, plumbers, electricians. I'm not saying it's plain sailing for them either, because they're mostly self-employed. But like, I seen an advert last week, and it was a house painter, so a painter and decorator, saying that he could not get people to come and work for him, and he was offering £23 an hour. Right?
Wow.
Because
you're like, hey, I have a lot of coworkers who can paint. You got a brush.
Yeah, it's like, and I'm thinking, wow, now that's it. People will probably have gone to college, maybe done a year, maybe two, to specialise in the trades. I think it depends, and it varies trade to trade. But like, in general, you couldn't get people to come work for them for that money. And when I started out in nursing 6 years ago, my hourly rate was £11.20.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it went up to £11.70 after 6 months and £12.30 at a year. And up until recently, the starting wage was £12.87 for a nurse in Scotland. It was £12.37 for a nurse in England and Wales.
So we just basically need to start a GoFundMe for the NHS. I think, bravo to all of you for this fight, because it is definitely worth it. The bar needs to be raised.
It is worth it. I think the very future of our profession and the NHS is linked to this fight, because if we cannot get people to come in and do these jobs, then the government are going to swoop in at some point and say, we can't provide the services, so here's private healthcare providers who are willing to step in because it's what the country needs. That's how a lot of us envision it's going to end up. So we need to do something to stop
robotic
that.
nurses. They're bringing robots in. They're telehealth. It's like, we're going to have a nurse, come on on the TV. Well, that's not going to help me wipe a patient and turn a patient and
well, exactly. And
the context of care.
Put a SATS probe on a patient, and it's telling you the patient there's no heartbeat. I'm like, well, they're talking to me and drinking a cup of tea, so this is why robots will never replace nurses. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's actually insulting that they think a robot could do that job. Yeah, it can read vital signs, maybe it can learn to do that pretty accurately. But I mean, yourself, like, if people are sick and they doctor Google, they come up with all sorts of ridiculous answers as to they have a headache because they're a bit dehydrated, but they're away thinking they've got some really rare illness. And that's it. You cannot replace human beings and what we bring to the job. I'm sure industry would love if they could, but they can't.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, at least not at this point. I don't know what kind of sci-fi futuristic world might have all of us like no longer needing real human beings looking after us, but I dread to think,
Yeah.
I went on a tangent slightly there, I think, but
that was good.
You get my point.
No, it's true. I mean, we have now we now have Starbucks kind of merging with Amazon. Amazon's bringing in healthcare, so Amazon and Walmart are having healthcare clinics. Right. That is so. Again, there are a lot of changes going on in healthcare, which we'll go into in other episodes, and each of Liz and I on our own channels. But there's a lot happening right now. This is a very historic time in healthcare for workers and for patients and consumers, and it's important that people really start thinking critically and seeing what's going on.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I think we're at that juncture. Inflation, COVID, and general unsafe staffing in the UK, all of that's culminated, and it's pushed nurses who in fact, historically, the Royal College had an anti-strike policy, right? That's how much things have changed, that an organisation who is known historically for never supporting strikes is now taking out the whole of the UK.
Yeah. Well,
thank you so much. This is like
gosh. Yeah.
This informative beyond what I imagined.
Yes. This was super helpful. And I think, good to see that it's not just like, this is, like you said earlier, a universal thing that I think we could all learn from each other and realize like, oh, hey, like this is not something that we are just feeling here and you are feeling there. And we could support each other and because we have a lot of people and you have a lot of people, just amplify that voice a lot and hopefully get people the public to actually hear. Cause I think, like you said, the public is what's going to change minds. And I think you're doing a great job at that. And thank you so much for giving us your time today and teaching us all of these things. We were like,
it was an absolute pleasure.
Possibly honestly. The most naive people you've ever talked to. We're like, hello, the NHS. And you're like, oh my God.
No, not at all. I've watched you on TikTok, obviously. And I was actually secretly delighted when you replied back to me one day. I was like, oh wow, like this nurse in America is actually taking the time to respond back. I thought that was lovely because
she's talking to Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, I've never met you till today. That I've never met you till today, but it's been an absolute joy speaking to you both. This is why I like doing things like this, because it's like an informal chat. And you're able to like discuss your opinions. Whereas if I go on the media, they will probably edit down exactly what they want and they'll put it out with their own slant. But this is where the real truth is. It is in grassroots and it is in our own media. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram Reels, Facebook, TV, whatever it is they're running equivalent of. This is where people really get the opportunity to put real people's opinions and real people's lives out there. So yeah, like this was really enjoyable for me, speaking to you guys and seeing what it's like over there and how you feel.
Well, thank you. It's been
very
great.
Much appreciate it.
We're sorry Craig wasn't able to be here with us.
I know, that's a shame. Obviously I said I've got a touch of the cold as well, and I'm like trying so hard not to sniffle through it. Just try.
Well, you've done a great job.
Yeah, I've been trying so hard. Like, it's amazing. It's like, see when you get an itch and you're like, I can't scratch this right now. It's like that. But
I would never know.
I was really determined to get on and actually get a chance, because I feel like, I spoke to you the other day really unexpectedly on TikTok when I joined your live and you sent me the invitation to join you, and I was like, oh, okay, no makeup, but fine, let's go for it. And it was really good. Like, I love speaking to nurses from other countries because it's so wildly different, and I have, probably you guys as well, have a lot of preconceptions about what things are like, in other countries. And a lot of what I learn about America, unfortunately, is things like documentaries of people saying, I had to chop my own hand off because I've got no insurance. And I'm like, what? Like, surely that's not real. And I've started to learn over time that, unfortunately, a lot of it is, And our system here, it's flawed. It's flawed. But the principle of it is perfect.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The principle's perfect.
Yeah,
everyone. Healthcare for everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. You come into one of our hospitals, everyone's the same.
Yeah.
And then you guys doing your thing to raise awareness that we can make it better, right?
Yeah, we can.
So, that's
I really
awesome.
believe that, because someone said to me, and I think I said this last week on Twitter, actually. I've met some nurses on Twitter, obviously, across the UK that I would never have met in any other way. And I was in a chat group, and one of them said to me, speaking about myself, and one of the people who founded the campaign that I'm with, and she was like, oh, you guys give me hope for the future. And I said, it's coming. We're going to be striking. And she's like, nah. She said, I wish you were right. Don't get me wrong. And I said, listen to me. You and I will stand side by side on a picket. The day is coming, and it's coming soon. And see, when all this happened, I messaged her and I said, I told you.
Look at that.
I've learned, don't just, don't challenge a Scottish person. Just,
take
it to the bank.
In the media. Yeah. funnily enough, like I do think maybe the accent is quite intimidating. I think people think we're really quite rough in Scotland. It's just the accent, honestly. We're very nice people. In fact, that's what I mean. Scotland is much more left-leaning, I think, as a government, as a people. I mean, I don't know if you've seen in particular, like quite often, you get people who have a bad attitude to immigrants in general. But when immigration department showed up to try and deport people in Glasgow, they formed a blockade.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't let the vans get out, so they had to leave.
Wow.
You know, like some of the things we're doing in Scotland that I think are, really forward thinking, and I'm happy to be part of this country. And one day in the near future, potentially, we will be independent. You know, that would be the hope. And it's not because we don't like our fellow citizens in England or Wales. It's the government. You know, we want to be able to do things our way, because our way, you know, where we give people free education, where we mitigate the cost of prescriptions, provide a different welfare system, the things that Scotland is trying to do, providing baby boxes to everyone. So if you have a baby here, you'll get a box from the government. And like it's like you could use it as like an initial, like a kind of like a Moses basket. And it comes with some equipment for your baby and blankets and things like that. We've got all these schemes that we're trying to implement to make life better for normal people, average people.
That's awesome.
You know, and that is to be celebrated.
The baby boxes, that's a whole topic. That's a whole topic we should do at some point.
I love the baby boxes.
That's like people are, just so you know, mind blown in the United States about the concept of baby boxes. And I know some people have made videos on TikTok about that. And and it's but thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
And then where can we find you if people would like to find you? This is your Twitter, right?
Yep, that's me.
Anywhere else you would like to send people, funnel them?
Yeah, so
shoot them your
mainly the two places that you will mostly find me is on that Twitter account, but I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Mastodon recently with the exact same username.
Cool.
Mastodon is obviously a little bit more complicated, so it's NHSActivistRN at mass.to. You can find me there. But to be honest, if you go to any of my social media, there'll be a link to my link tree if you wanted to follow me, and a different one. But Twitter and TikTok are my main two right now, I would say.
And we'll put all those links, and I know Adrian will too, in the description, so you can super easily find you. And then is there anything other that, like, on the day of the strike, that if we could do to help, just, I'm assuming, trying to tweet that out, whether you're on Instagram or whatever, just to amplify that hashtag? Is that the best thing that we can do? And I'll put the hashtags in the description as well.
You can amplify the hashtags, absolutely. But I'll tell you what would be amazing, right, is if you could hold a picture, like an A4 print off, saying you support the nurses in the UK.
Cool.
Because I just think that it's a personal image, and it's even more powerful. A tweet is fantastic. Last week when I got some from Adrian and the nurse in Canada that I speak to, like, people really liked that when they seen that messages were coming in from other countries for us. I think it heartened them when they were out in the picket lines, because it's so, I don't know what it's like there, but it's freezing cold in Scotland.
Oh, right.
And obviously if everybody's struggling to put their heating on, even more so. But on the picket lines, it was cold, and things like that, they really help keep people going. So if you're up for it, hold an A4 picture and put that out social with the hashtags, and I can assure you I will get them shared. And if I'm at the pickets, because the picket that I'm thinking of going to, obviously because there isn't strikes in Scotland, I may be going over to Belfast for the day in Northern Ireland to stand on their picket line in solidarity with them, because it's my trade union, obviously, and people that I know there. So if so, then I'll get some of the footage up from the picket line. That would be really good.
Awesome.
If you could share it for us.
Absolutely.
Cool. We can do that.
Yes. 100%.
I have a lot more Instagram power than I do Twitter power. I have 0 followers. So I will Instagram it up, but we'll tell if you guys are out there watching and you are in like anywhere really, do the things, make the little sign. It can be on a Post-it note on the back of, I don't know, anything.
That'd be great. Anything, absolutely anything. And I will share them. Like if you tag me, if you come onto any of my socials and you're sending a message of solidarity, just let me know where you're from. It will get shared. And it's like, I'll check it at regular intervals on the day to make sure that it gets out there and seen by people.
Awesome.
Fabulous.
Perfect. Well, that sounds very doable. We can do that. And good luck. Thank you so much for talking with us today. This was fascinating. Yeah. Unfortunately, you've met me now. And I'm going to want to talk to you all the time. So that's sad for you.
Thanks so much. No, it's absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak with you. It's like really generous of you to actually have me on and stuff. Like it's really like appreciated, because it's good to be able to reach a wider audience and combat some of the propaganda in the media, you know. But we have got the support. I do think we're going to win this. Might take a bit of time, but I do think we'll get there. And hopefully I'll be out in the picket lines with my colleagues in England, Wales and Northern Ireland within 4 weeks.
Awesome.
That's great. That's awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, hopefully maybe one day we'll have a follow-up when this all works and it goes the way we want.
If it does, we've got a blueprint. Although by the sounds of it, your bargaining situation over there is already very, very good in comparison. It's a totally different way to do it here. But yeah, hopefully we'll be having a conversation when it's all been victorious and I can tell you what it was like to stand on the lines.
Yes, I look forward to that.
Absolutely.
Well, have a beautiful rest of your day, and now you can go sneeze as much as you need.
Thanks very much. It was nice to see
Siobhan.
you both.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Hey guys, thank you so much. We had a great time interviewing Siobhan Aston. Nurse Liz and I did a collaboration here. Make sure you go to Nurse Liz's channel and check out the first part of this. And I really appreciate everybody being here. And it's so important that we understand what's going on in other countries in healthcare and what nurses and healthcare workers are facing and what their struggles are and how we can support. So thanks so much for watching. Make sure you click the like button. Check out Siobhan's socials. Go to Nurse Liz's channel and check out the other part of this interview. And we're going to be bringing you more eventually about what's going on in the UK with nurses. Thanks.